Good morning and happy Tuesday 10 at 10 and happy New Year 2023 to all of you. Wishing you a lot of health and happiness and lots of great baking for 2023. So let's get started. You know the format. We have questions being sent to BAKERpedia, and every Tuesday we gather to answer your question. I am your host and bakery influencer, Richard Charpentier. And without further ado, let's get started. So someone asked a question of how many grams of potassium sorbate can I use in 1.5 liter of milk and they're asking whether or not they should put it boiling the milk after or before boiling the milk. So basically, not sure the main goal of adding it to milk is just to keep the shelf life of the milk longer, or is this being added to something else? Because it's very vague in terms, are you trying to preserve the milk? And sorbic acid, potassium sorbate, is being used in different, mostly in chemically leavened product, because the sorbic acid does not work well with yeast-raised products, as it will inhibit the yeast activity, and so it kills yeast. So it's not really good for yeast-raised product. So if you put it in milk, and not sure what shelf life you're going under the FDA regulation, sorbic is considered a GRAS ingredient, generally recognized as safe, as long as you follow the recommended manufacturer protocol. So I wish we could go more into it, but remember, if you add sorbic, with milk, the protein within milk might coagulate or start curdling if your pH gets too low. And I would just run some tests, if it's a shelf life of your milk you're trying to extend, if it's trying to, make it into a solution prior to putting into a cake, that's something different. So it has to be depending on how much milk are you putting into your recipe to be calculating to know exactly how much would be best for you. But the end goal is for sorbic acid is to act as a antimicrobial preservative or ingredient. So there's a lot of factors taking place versus just putting how many grams. So, but thank you for sending the question. Now, someone wants to know they're using the water absorption result from the farinograph. How do I convert the result to actual water added during baking? So most of the farinograms, the analytical equipment being used, you would see a percent. So usually on a farinogram, if you run a farinograph, you would use 300 grams of flour, and then you would add water until on the graph until you reach the 500 BU Brabender unit line. And at that point, that is the amount of water you're adding. So, and that's what you want to correlate. Ideally, if you're running your own, you want at least 2 to 3 tests to validate it. You don't want to go with one test and just correlate that. If you're getting it from the certificate of analysis from the miller, then take the amount of water that was being added. So it will give it to you in terms of percent. So if it's a percent, then I would do that based on your flour. If you end up using 200 kilos of flour, then the percent will relate to, if it's 55% absorption or 56 or 60, that's a number you would relate. But if you're running your own farinograph, that's going to be the amount of water you're using to get to the 500 BU. And then if your base has to be anyway a standard number, that's a non-changing number, and that would be the amount of water you're using against your 300 grams. You would do the math, get your percent, and then translate that into your production facility. So I hope it answered your question. Thank you for sending it. Now, for our last question of today. So somebody wants to know, working a starter, but they're not getting any sour taste. And they said, how can I make it more sour? Keep it out of the refrigerator and feed it once a day. So a starter would be the equivalent of a dough or sourdough, and the acidity also is derived by the strain. You know, we're talking about a wild yeast, and each wild yeast is different, similar to the San Francisco bread, which is quite acidic, but it is quite acidic because of the nature of the strain of the sourdough or the starter. So each starter will work differently. It could provide more acidity if you keep it at a different temperature. And yes, getting it out of the refrigerator at a temperature warmer will make more active yeast cells, you know, and the more CO2, the more acidity will drop. But looking at the total titrable acidity, we'll be able to determine how much acidity you can get from it. So the longer the time, technically you're going to get more acidity. And if you have a way to measure the overall pH and TTA of your starter, that would be a good indicator. And try it outside of the room, or if you don't have a pH meter or able to run a total titrable acidity, I recommend you leave it out, then maybe smell it, and the more, you know, acidity you're going to start smelling the alcohol coming out, you might develop more flavor. And that doesn't work. You can just change the ratio of sourdough you're using or starter you're using. There's a lot of different methods. And also the last point on that is, what are you feeding your starter? Are you feeding the main flour often to add more acidic notes? Using a rye, using a barley flour might add extra flavors to and acidic flavors. But it's all about the fermentation. Some sourdoughs are not as sour or acidic as others, and it has to do, as I was saying, you know, with the strain of the wild yeast you're using. But that is it for today. I will wrap it up. So thank you again, and Happy New Year, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.